What if an ancient book written long before the New Testament contained a warning about judgment, the last days, and the generation that would live through the final age? And what if that warning wasn't simply about knowing when the end would come, but about knowing how you should live when it does? The Book of Enoch has fascinated readers for centuries. It speaks about the watchers. It speaks about judgment. It speaks about the corruption of the earth. It speaks about Noah and the destruction that came upon the ancient world. And throughout the text, Enoch repeatedly presents a world moving toward a final reckoning. But there's something we need to establish before we go any further. The Book of Enoch does not give us a simple chapter titled, "Here are 7 things Christians must do during the Great Tribulation." So this video isn't going to pretend that it does. Instead, we're going to examine the warnings, principles, and instructions found in Enoch and ask what they could mean when viewed through the lens of the last generation, biblical prophecy, and the coming judgment. Because the central message isn't simply, "The end is coming." The deeper question is, what kind of person will you be when it comes? And that's where this becomes personal. Because throughout the Book of Enoch, humanity is repeatedly confronted with the consequences of corruption, violence, rebellion, deception, and the rejection of righteousness. And Enoch's answer isn't to tell people to panic. It's to warn them, to separate themselves from wickedness, to seek righteousness, to remain faithful, and to understand that judgment is coming. That message becomes especially powerful when Enoch describes the generation living near the time of Noah. The world had become filled with violence. The watchers had corrupted humanity. The giants had brought destruction. And people continued living as though judgment would never come. Then, judgment came. The warning had been given. But most people weren't prepared. And that ancient pattern becomes the foundation for one of the most important questions surrounding end times Bible prophecy today. Could the last generation make the same mistake? Could people become so distracted by everyday life that they fail to recognize the spiritual danger around them? Could they become so comfortable that warnings about the last days no longer matter? And if the world really is moving toward a final judgment, what should a person actually do? That's what we're going to uncover. 7 principles. 7 warnings drawn from the themes and teachings found in the Book of Enoch that can help us understand what the text emphasizes about righteousness, obedience, corruption, judgment, and remaining faithful. And the first one is perhaps the most important. Because before Enoch tells humanity what to avoid, he points us towards something we are supposed to become. If you want more deep investigations into the Book of Enoch, biblical prophecy, the end times, the last days, and ancient texts that most people never hear discussed, make sure you subscribe to the 9th tablet. Because we're not simply chasing theories here. We're going back to the ancient text and asking what it actually says. And rule number 1 begins with righteousness. The first rule is simple, but perhaps the hardest one to follow. Choose righteousness. The Book of Enoch repeatedly draws a sharp line between the righteous and the wicked. Enoch doesn't present the coming judgment as something random. It is connected to how people live. And this is one of the strongest themes running through the book. In Enoch's visions, the righteous are not simply people who know about God. They are people who remain faithful to Him. They are contrasted with those who pursue violence, corruption, injustice, and rebellion. And this distinction becomes especially important when Enoch describes the judgment of the world. The wicked may appear to prosper for a time. They may believe their actions have no consequences. They may even look at the righteous and wonder why they should continue doing what is right. But Enoch repeatedly presents a different conclusion. God sees, and judgment eventually comes. That's a powerful warning for anyone thinking about the last days. Because when people hear the words end times or Great Tribulation, the first questions are often, when will it happen? What signs should I watch for? Will there be a rapture? Who is the Antichrist? But Enoch directs our attention somewhere else. What kind of life are you living? Because knowing prophecy without living righteously doesn't accomplish much. You can know every theory about the end times, memorize every prophetic passage, watch every prediction, and still completely miss the moral warning. The ancient message is much more uncomfortable. Prepare your life, not just your calendar. And that's exactly what we see in the story surrounding Noah. Noah wasn't simply someone who knew that judgment was coming. He was presented as a righteous man living in a corrupt generation. The world around him had become violent and deeply corrupted. Yet Noah remained faithful. And that distinction mattered. Because when judgment came, the question wasn't simply who had heard the warning. It was who had responded to it. That gives us our first principle for the last generation. Don't allow the corruption around you to determine the condition within you. If everyone around you becomes dishonest, remain honest. If everyone celebrates violence, don't embrace violence. If everyone treats righteousness as foolish, don't abandon righteousness simply to fit in. And if everyone says judgment will never come, remember that Enoch's entire message is built around the certainty that God eventually judges evil. But here's something important. Choosing righteousness doesn't mean pretending you're perfect. The biblical tradition is filled with people who failed, repented, and returned to God. Righteousness isn't the claim, "I have never sinned." It's the decision, "I will not make peace with sin." That's a completely different thing. And this is why the first rule matters so much. Because if the last days become a time of confusion, fear, pressure, and deception, your foundation cannot simply be what everyone else is doing. Your foundation has to be where you stand before God. If you're finding value in this investigation, take a moment to subscribe to the 9th tablet. We're going through all 7 principles, and we're keeping the focus on what these ancient texts actually emphasize, not sensational claims created for clicks. Because rule number 1 is only the beginning. The Book of Enoch gives another warning that becomes even more relevant when we start talking about the last generation. It concerns something that destroyed the world before Noah, something that can spread quietly, and something that can make people comfortable with evil long before judgment arrives: corruption. And Enoch's warning about it is where rule number 2 begins. The second rule is one of the strongest warnings we can take from the Book of Enoch. Do not become corrupted. Because when Enoch describes the world before the flood, corruption isn't presented as something that happened overnight. It spread. It entered human society. It became normal. And eventually, people were living inside a world where violence and wickedness had become deeply established. The Watchers played a major role in Enoch's account. They crossed the boundary between the heavenly and human realms. They took human wives. They taught humanity knowledge that the text presents as forbidden. And their actions contributed to a world that became increasingly violent and corrupt. But notice something important. Human beings still had a choice. The existence of corruption around them did not automatically make every person corrupt. That's why Enoch repeatedly distinguishes between the righteous and the wicked. And that distinction becomes extremely relevant when we think about the idea of a last generation. Because one of the greatest dangers isn't simply persecution or suffering. It is normalization. When something is repeated long enough, people can stop recognizing it as wrong. A lie becomes ordinary. Violence becomes entertainment. Greed becomes ambition. Cruelty becomes strength. And eventually, righteousness itself can begin to look strange. That is exactly the kind of environment in which Enoch's warnings become powerful. The challenge isn't simply surviving a dangerous world. It's surviving without becoming like the world around you. Think about Noah. He didn't live in a perfect society. He lived in a corrupt one. Yet the tradition surrounding him presents him as someone who remained faithful while surrounded by people going in the opposite direction. And that gives us an important lesson. Your environment can influence you, but it doesn't have to define you. You don't have to participate in everything simply because everyone else is participating. You don't have to accept every belief because it's popular. And you don't have to abandon your convictions because standing for them makes you uncomfortable. Because according to Enoch's worldview, judgment doesn't disappear simply because society has stopped talking about righteousness. God still sees. And that's where the warning becomes personal. If you're part of what you believe is the last generation, don't spend all your energy trying to identify every possible prophecy. Ask yourself a more uncomfortable question. Am I becoming more righteous or more comfortable with corruption? Because prophecy without transformation can become nothing more than entertainment. You can spend hours watching videos about the end times, the Great Tribulation, the rapture, and biblical prophecy, while ignoring the things you already know you need to change. Enoch's warning pushes us in the opposite direction. Don't just watch for judgment. Prepare your character for it. And preparation doesn't mean predicting a date. It means living faithfully regardless of when that day comes. That's the difference between watching and being ready. If you're enjoying this deeper look at the Book of Enoch and its warnings about the last days, make sure you subscribe to the 9th tablet. We're only on rule number 2. And the next warning becomes even more serious. Because corruption isn't the only thing Enoch warns about. There is another danger that can destroy a person from the inside. Deception. And if the last generation is going to face a world filled with competing voices, competing beliefs, and competing claims about truth, then knowing what to believe may become just as important as knowing what to avoid. Rule number 3 is about discernment. The third rule is about something that becomes increasingly important whenever people believe they are living in the last days. Discern what is true. Because not every voice claiming to speak for God actually speaks for God. And not every prophecy circulating online is biblical prophecy. The Book of Enoch itself is a reminder of how seriously ancient writers treated the difference between truth and deception. Remember the Watchers. They weren't presented as ordinary human teachers. They were heavenly beings. And yet, according to Enoch, they revealed knowledge that was not meant to be revealed in the way they revealed it. The problem wasn't simply knowledge. It was who was giving it, why they were giving it, and what happened as a result. That should make us careful. Because today, information is everywhere. Every day you can find someone claiming, "I know when the tribulation begins. I know who the Antichrist is. I discovered the hidden meaning of Enoch. This prophecy proves that the end will happen on this exact date." And within minutes, thousands of people can hear the claim. But the existence of a confident speaker doesn't make the message true. Discernment requires testing. And this is where I want to make something very clear. The Book of Enoch should not be treated as a magical codebook that gives us secret dates and guaranteed predictions about today's headlines. It is an ancient Jewish apocalyptic work with visions, symbolism, warnings, and theological themes. So if someone tells you, Enoch proves this exact event will happen next Tuesday, be careful. Where does the text actually say that? If someone claims, this verse proves the identity of the Antichrist, is that what the passage actually says? Or is someone building an interpretation on top of it? And if someone tells you, you must believe my interpretation or you won't survive the last days, that's another reason to slow down. Because fear can make people accept claims they would normally question. And that's why discernment matters. The last generation, if that is indeed where we are in history, won't simply face physical challenges. It will face an information crisis. Thousands of voices, thousands of interpretations, thousands of predictions, and everyone claiming to know the truth. So rule number 3 is simple. Don't surrender your discernment. Read, study, compare, pray, test what you're being taught. And most importantly, don't allow fear to replace wisdom. Because preparation for the end times isn't about becoming obsessed with every headline. It's about becoming grounded enough that every headline doesn't control you. And there's another reason this matters. The Book of Enoch repeatedly presents heavenly beings as existing within a structure of authority and judgment. The Watchers didn't become gods simply because they possessed supernatural knowledge. They were still accountable. They were still judged. And their knowledge did not save them from the consequences of rebellion. That's a powerful warning for us. Knowing more doesn't automatically make you wiser. You can know every prophecy, every theory, every ancient manuscript, and still make terrible decisions. Wisdom isn't simply having information. It's knowing what to do with it. If you're enjoying this investigation into the Book of Enoch, end times prophecy, the last days, and biblical mysteries, make sure you subscribe to the 9th tablet. Because we're not here just to collect mysterious information. We're trying to understand what these ancient warnings were actually communicating. And we've reached only rule number 3. Because even if you remain righteous, even if you avoid corruption, even if you learn to discern truth from deception, there is another challenge waiting. What happens when doing the right thing becomes costly? Because eventually, faith may require more than simply believing. It may require endurance. And that's where rule number 4 begins. The fourth rule is where belief becomes more than words. Endure. Because it's easy to say you have faith when everything is going well. It's much harder when staying faithful begins to cost you something. The Book of Enoch repeatedly presents the righteous as people who remain faithful despite what is happening around them. They aren't promised that wickedness will disappear immediately. They aren't told that judgment will never touch their generation. Instead, Enoch's visions repeatedly point toward a future in which the righteous must remain steadfast while surrounded by corruption and injustice. And that distinction matters. Because when people hear about the Great Tribulation or the last days, the natural question is, how can I escape everything that's coming? But Scripture and ancient Jewish apocalyptic literature often place another question in front of us. Will you remain faithful when things become difficult? Those are two very different questions. Escape focuses on circumstances. Endurance focuses on character. And we see that idea reflected in the story of Noah. Noah didn't simply hear that judgment was coming and then continue living exactly like everyone around him. He acted on what he believed. He remained faithful while the surrounding world continued in another direction. And eventually the warning became reality. That's an important principle for anyone thinking about end times prophecy. Don't build your entire faith around the assumption that nothing difficult will ever happen to you. Instead, build a faith strong enough to remain standing even when circumstances become difficult. Because we don't know exactly how future events will unfold. We don't know every detail of the coming tribulation. And the Book of Enoch itself doesn't give us a modern timeline that allows us to confidently map every current event onto its visions. What it does repeatedly emphasize is that judgment is real, righteousness matters, and the faithful should remain steadfast. And that makes endurance more than simply surviving. It means refusing to let fear determine your decisions. Refusing to abandon your convictions because everyone else has. Refusing to trade your faith for temporary comfort. And refusing to believe that doing what is right is pointless simply because evil appears to be winning. Because Enoch's worldview is built around a powerful idea. Evil may appear to have the advantage for a season, but it does not have the final word. The Watchers appeared powerful. The giants appeared unstoppable. Violence covered the earth. But eventually, judgment came. That's the pattern. And if you're living through a period of uncertainty, remember this. You don't need to know every detail of tomorrow to remain faithful today. You don't need to predict the exact date of the end. You don't need to identify every mysterious figure in prophecy. You need to remain grounded in what you already know is right. And that's why rule number 4 matters. Endure. Don't allow fear to turn you away from God. Don't allow pressure to make you compromise your convictions. And don't assume that because righteousness is difficult, righteousness is useless. If you're enjoying this deeper exploration of the Book of Enoch, the last days, biblical prophecy, and the warnings surrounding the Great Tribulation, make sure you subscribe to the 9th tablet. Because we're halfway through the 7 rules. And the next one may be one of the most practical. Because Enoch doesn't only warn about wicked people and supernatural beings. It also warns about something that can quietly destroy a person's spiritual life. The way they treat other people. And if the last generation wants to be ready for judgment, rule number 5 is impossible to ignore. The 5th rule is one that can easily get overlooked when people become obsessed with prophecy. Treat others with righteousness. Because preparing for the last days isn't only about what you believe. It's also about how you treat people. The Book of Enoch repeatedly connects righteousness with justice. The righteous aren't simply people who possess secret knowledge about heaven. They are contrasted with those who practice violence, oppression, corruption, and injustice. And remember what triggered the heavenly response before the flood. Enoch describes a world filled with violence. The cries of those who had been harmed reached heaven. The problem wasn't simply that humanity had developed strange beliefs. People were hurting other people. And heaven heard their cries. That is a powerful warning. Because sometimes discussions about the end times become so focused on identifying signs that we forget one of the simplest questions. How are you treating the person standing next to you? Are you honest with people? Do you take advantage of people when you have power over them? Do you treat the poor as invisible? Do you forgive? Do you show mercy? Do you practice justice when nobody is watching? These questions may not generate as much excitement as discussions about the Great Tribulation or the identity of the Antichrist, but they're much closer to the moral concerns running through ancient judgment literature. The Book of Enoch repeatedly presents God as a judge who sees what human beings do. Nothing is hidden forever. The powerful aren't automatically safe. The wealthy aren't automatically righteous. And the person who appears insignificant to society isn't insignificant before God. That idea appears again and again in Enoch's visions of judgment. Those who oppressed others eventually have to answer for what they did, and the righteous are ultimately vindicated. So if we're asking what the last generation should do, don't become so obsessed with surviving the world that you forget to love the people in it. Don't use prophecy as an excuse to become cruel. Don't use fear as an excuse to hate. Don't use your knowledge of Scripture to make yourself feel superior to everyone else, because knowledge without righteousness can become another form of pride. And this is particularly important for anyone studying ancient books like Enoch. There are fascinating mysteries in these texts. There are strange visions. There are descriptions of heavenly beings, judgment, the Watchers, giants, and the end of the age. But the purpose of studying them shouldn't simply be to become the person with the most interesting theories. The goal should be transformation. If learning about judgment makes you more compassionate, that's meaningful. If learning about the suffering of the ancient world makes you more concerned about injustice, that's meaningful. If studying prophecy makes you take your relationship with God more seriously, that's meaningful. But if prophecy only makes you afraid, angry, or obsessed with predicting the future, then perhaps we've missed something. Because the righteous person in Enoch isn't simply someone who knows that judgment is coming. It's someone whose life reflects a different standard. And that's why rule number 5 matters. Treat people with righteousness because God sees how you treat them. If you're enjoying this deeper exploration of the Book of Enoch, biblical prophecy, the last days, and the Great Tribulation, make sure you subscribe to the 9th tablet. We've reached 5 rules, but 2 remain. And the 6th warning takes us into something even deeper. Because Enoch doesn't only tell people to behave differently, he repeatedly points them toward God himself. And when everything around you becomes uncertain, when governments change, when society becomes unstable, when predictions multiply, and when fear begins controlling people's decisions, there is one thing Enoch's worldview continually brings us back to. Who do you trust? That's where rule number 6 begins. The 6th rule brings us to the heart of everything Enoch is trying to communicate. Put your trust in God. Because when people become convinced that the end times are approaching, fear can become overwhelming. What happens if society collapses? What happens if persecution comes? What happens during the Great Tribulation? What happens if everything we've depended on suddenly disappears? Those questions are understandable. But the ancient message repeatedly points beyond the circumstances, toward God. In Enoch's visions, the righteous aren't presented as people who have complete control over what happens around them. They don't control the wicked. They don't control the Watchers. They don't control the coming judgment. They don't control the timing of God's intervention. What they can control is whether they remain faithful. And that's an important distinction. You don't need to know exactly when judgment will come in order to trust the one who judges. You don't need to understand every detail of biblical prophecy to remain faithful. And you don't need to predict every event in the last days to live a life that honors God. The story of Noah illustrates this beautifully. Noah was warned about something that had not yet happened. The world around him continued as normal. But Noah acted on the warning. He trusted God enough to obey even when the circumstances around him didn't appear to justify his obedience. That is faith. Not simply believing something intellectually, but trusting God enough to act. And this is where we need to be careful with modern end times predictions. Every few years, someone announces that they have figured out the date. A new calculation appears. A new interpretation goes viral. A new headline becomes proof that the end has finally arrived, and people panic. But if our faith depends on having the perfect timeline, then our faith is standing on something very fragile, because dates can be wrong, interpretations can be wrong, predictions can be wrong. God doesn't have to be. That's why trust is so important. The Book of Enoch presents God as the ultimate judge over the Watchers, the giants, the wicked, and the forces of corruption. None of them ultimately escape his authority. The Watchers may have crossed boundaries. The giants may have brought destruction. Humanity may have become deeply corrupt. But the story never presents God as losing control. Judgment was coming. And when it came according to his authority. So if you believe you're living in the last generation, don't let fear become your master. Let faith become your foundation. Don't spend every waking hour trying to decode the next headline. Spend your time becoming the kind of person you would want to be if today were your final day. Pray, study, love, forgive, do what is right, and trust God with the things you cannot control. Because there is a difference between being prepared for the end and being terrified of the end. Preparation produces faithfulness. Fear produces panic. And the message we're finding throughout these ancient warnings is not live terrified because judgment is coming. It's live faithfully because God is just. If you're enjoying this deeper investigation into the Book of Enoch, the last days, biblical prophecy, and the Great Tribulation, make sure you subscribe to the 9th tablet. We're almost at the final rule. And the 7th one brings all the others together. Because righteousness isn't only about what you believe. It's not only about what you avoid. It's not only about enduring suffering. It's not only about treating others well. At the end of everything, there is one final question. Will you remain faithful until the end? And that's where rule number 7 begins. And now we reach the 7th and final rule. Everything we've discussed leads here. Righteousness, resisting corruption, discernment, endurance, justice, trusting God. But none of these mean much if we abandon them when the pressure becomes greatest. So rule number 7 is, remain faithful until the end. The Book of Enoch repeatedly presents history as moving toward a final separation between righteousness and wickedness. There is a time when evil appears powerful. There is a time when the righteous seem to suffer. There is a time when judgment appears delayed. But Enoch's message is that delay is not the same thing as abandonment. God's judgment may appear distant, but it is not forgotten. And that is one of the most important ideas for anyone thinking about the last generation. You don't know how long the difficult season will last. You don't know exactly when the final events will happen. You don't know what challenges your own lifetime may bring. But you can decide beforehand where you will stand. That's what endurance really means. It means that your faith isn't dependent on comfortable circumstances. It means you don't follow God only when everything is going your way. It means that when fear appears, you don't immediately abandon faith. When other people compromise, you don't automatically compromise. When society mocks righteousness, you don't become ashamed of it. And when the world tells you that nothing matters, you remember that God sees. Look again at the world Enoch describes before the flood. Violence had become widespread. Corruption had spread. The Watchers had violated boundaries. The giants had brought destruction. Humanity had become deeply entangled in wickedness. And yet there was still Noah. One man living faithfully in a corrupt generation. That is why the story is so powerful. Noah didn't need the entire world to agree with him before he obeyed God. He didn't need popular approval. He didn't need everyone around him to believe the warning. He simply remained faithful. And eventually, the warning became reality. Now, does this mean Enoch gives us a literal 7-step survival manual for the modern Great Tribulation? No. We need to be honest about that. The 7 rules we've explored are principles drawn from the themes of Enoch's warnings, not a verse-by-verse checklist written specifically for people living in 2026. And that's important because we should never turn an ancient text into something it never claimed to be. But the principles are remarkably clear. Choose righteousness. Reject corruption. Discern truth from deception. Endure when faith becomes difficult. Treat others with justice. Trust God. And finally, remain faithful. If you're enjoying this investigation into the Book of Enoch, End Times Prophecy, the Last Days, and the Great Tribulation, this is the perfect time to subscribe to the 9th tablet. Because we're not finished yet. There is one final question we need to answer. We've spent this entire video asking, what must the last generation do? But perhaps the deeper question is, why does Enoch warn humanity at all? Why preserve these visions? Why describe judgment? Why show Noah? Why reveal the watchers? Why repeatedly contrast the righteous with the wicked? The answer may be simpler than we expect. The warning itself is an act of mercy. And that's where our final conclusion takes us.